And we're back with David Watson and the Willows. We're in trance with the Willows. And we're going to talk about control.
Yeah, living in a society in which you do, everybody in your world is, as you call in your idiom, a control freak in one way or another. If things were just the way one would like them to be, then the world would be a better place. It is that simple for many. But in actual fact, each person has their own perspective, their own view of the world, that comes from their very own set of unique experiences that come from birth forward, and sometimes from past existences into this life and forward. So these preconceived ideas about life and how one is going to manage it are all part and parcel of the development of one's consciousness and one's soul in any given life. And the way that one would do this is one would begin to set up a series of beliefs, which would be important and enable one to manage one's life in whatever society and whatever time in history one would exist in. But taking in today's world in which you live, for example, many people have to live a highly controlled life, a life in which they are constantly in a place of trying to keep their ducks in a row, trying to move forward, trying to keep everything just so. And of course, in attempting to do this, one is trying to bring order into one's life amongst the apparent chaotic profusion of all that is existing in your social order right now. So, one would need controls. And controls are good things, too, in many ways. You need controls to organize your society, to organize your towns and your cities, to organize your roads, to organize the rules and regulations of the country in order for the individuals living within it to have some idea of how to interact with each other, and being offered some type of direction, hopefully beneficial or benevolent from the governing source. However, within this, one begins to understand here the nature of what control really consists of. Controls are actually belief systems that are put into place in order to maintain a status quo. In other words, to keep things the same. That's why laws are there to be unquestioned and to say this is the way it is, and anyone who goes outside of those parameters will be breaking the law and will have to consequently deal with whatever repercussions are connected with that belief, you see. So these are beliefs, but the beliefs then become rules, and the rules are those that you would call laws. So all of these things are also controls. But no control that is in your social order is immutable. Laws change from decade to decade, from century to century, from society to society. Things that are acceptable in certain social orders are not in others. So these controls here begin to also qualify and shape the type of social order that one lives within. The very belief systems that are held by the individuals within that social order create society in a whole. Yet, the individual is constantly trying to break away from being controlled. For when one lives in a society that contains a large amount of control, one is naturally going to resist this. Because, you see, along with controls comes the other aspect of life that maintains a control, and that is resistance. One has controls in one's life, and if one is going to keep them strong and keep them true, then one must resist change in order for those controls to remain consistent, you see? Which, of course, is against the very opposition of what life is about. For life is not about keeping things the same. Life is about change. Life is about shifting. Life is about becoming, not just being. So, given this is the thought, then one would begin to look at controls and determine they are the very root cause of all dissension within any social order that one would live within. For it is the common beliefs that are held by all of those in a society that are the rule, so to speak, as to how that social order is going to interact and exist wholly and together. So these controls are, as we say, important to manage and maintain a social order, but at the same time, those who are being managed by them do not necessarily want to be managed by them. They want to be having an opportunity to use their own rules, their own regulations, their own beliefs. So this is where conflict begins to come into social order. And one group of people holding a certain belief of control or rules and regulations, and another holding diametrically opposed ideas, come into conflict with each other. And as a result, using the usual human way of interacting and problem solving, wind up trying to eliminate each other until there is only one. That's an outcrop of control, you see. Conflict, resistance, negativity, and also apprehension. Because when one must deal with certain rules and regulations in life, it does create a certain degree of sense of not having any control. Being out of control, in fact. And when one is out of control, well, one has great difficulties as one not. One begins to have emotional difficulties, begins to develop stress, anxiety, disorders. Begins to feel lost and locked. Begins to feel quite powerless, quite helpless, and quite hopeless. When an individual feels like this, they fall into a state that's often referred to as of depression. And in a controlled society in which one exists, in which you exist in this time and day and age, these feelings are not just localized, they are widespread. Many people begin to feel controlled by the society they live in, by the world around them, and as a result lose their sense of individuality. All around control issues. So, being aware of it is one thing, but changing it is another. So the first thing one must first do is to begin to look and say, what are the controls in my life that are directing me in a place that I don't want to be? When one begins to look at questions like this, then the answers become apparent. Then one begins to have an inner revelation and an understanding of what their purpose in life is. So it is these things here that provide one with the opportunity, the perfect opportunity, to grow by busting the old beliefs around controls, by accepting and embracing controls as part of the life process, yet realizing they are not icons in one's life. They are simply constructs. They are created by man. And whatever is created by man is malleable. It is flexible. It can change and will change as time goes on, as society changes, and as the individual's conscious focus begins to change as well. So, as you see, controls are at the very root of your social order. They are what helps shape society, shape your civilization. And in certain instances when it is given the power, they are even used to define them. Many people live their lives in accordance with the rules and regulations of the social order in which they exist, without giving a second thought as to whether they are right or wrong, but simply the fact that they are part of the social order and they are not to be usurped. So the individual has an opportunity in the world in which one lives to release oneself from these controls, to release oneself from the sense that one must always follow the social line, must always toe the line, so to speak. So, how to do this? How to break away from it? Well, that's the topic of another chat. But in truth here, taking control means taking one's process and shifting into a place where one does no longer feel out of control, where one begins to release oneself from the needs to manage everything, to micromanage everything around oneself, and beginning to go with the flow of those things that are happening around oneself. But as we say here, these are solutions that will be discussed in another time.
All right, you've been listening to David Watson and Ask the Willows. You can find out more about David Watson and the Willows if you go to their website, AsktheWillows.com, AsktheWillows.com, and we will be back. Thank you.